So welcome, everybody. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us from the garden this evening. It's very nice to see you all there. And we've got a very good speaker with us this evening, Phil Moss, who really needs no introduction at all, really, Phil Moss. And those of you that have been able to watch the previous part of Gloucester Civic Trust, Our Story, you'll know that we got up as far as Ladybell Gate House. And the next part of this will take us as far as we can get in the next 45 minutes. We're going to see how it goes, aren't we, Phil? Because we've got masses to look at. So anyway, over to you, Phil. I'm just going to go now and share the screen. Is that okay, Gareth? I hope.
Yes, it's fine. So I was trying to find the mute button. Yes, okay. That's absolutely fine. You should be able to.
There we go. Right. Gloucester Civic Trust, Our Story. And it's our story too, obviously. So, no, Phil, what's the very first thing we're looking at here?
Well, this is the Westgate's, the inquiry into the building in Westgate, which is 30 Westgate Street. And the inquiry was actually set up. We're very lucky at the time because the attitude of Gloucester buildings before this time was not too good. And we had a new planning officer. And then this number 30 Westgate Street came up, and there were enough objections came through. And the fact was, we then, Civic Trust took part, the Gloucester and District Archaeological Research Group took part, and they held this particular public inquiry. It was actually for the Alliance Building Society. They decided they wanted to knock it down, and their QC was a chap called Mr. Benson Ansell, and he actually made a big case saying the building's not sound, and he went through the whole rigmarole and what have you. But fortunately, the inquiry actually went the way that we were hoping it would, and they were prevented from knocking it down. And I think the next picture is it shows that's the building as it sort of was, obviously much earlier on the left there, which is the Godsall and Sons Fine Stroud Ales. But on the right is the building that the Alliance Building Society wanted to put up in its place. I won't comment on that.
No, I was going to say you can see how different it looks, and I think that's the reason.
I mean, I think the point was that although the facade had been altered from the lower couple of floors there, but they were still in the top floor. They were still parts of the original facade, and also in the rebuilding. And this is sort of a Georgian front for the Godsall and Sons building. They'd actually reused a number of timbers from the original facade. So there was quite a bit of the original building still there. But of course, inside, I mean, there's a massive amount of timber framing. And it was a very late timber frame building. This is the thing about it, it was a bit special. It was probably one of the last timber frame buildings to be built in Gloucester.
And I think the picture on the left is interesting because it actually shows the old Theatre Royal. That's
right, and next to it, Theatre Royal. That's right, and of course, the actual Godsall and Sons building was. You went through the door where it says pit. You can see over the front door it says pit. That was the entrance into the pit of the theatre itself.
And yes, if people can see it down at the bottom of that picture.
Yeah. So you had to walk through that alleyway, and of course, as you're going into the theatre, of course, the people would nip into the bar for a drink on the way in and out. So
it wasn't it called the Theatre Vaults? My dad told me that.
It was the Theatre Vaults public house. Yeah.
Okay, but shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what it looks like now. That's right. On the left.
Yeah, the thing and beauty about it is that say the top two floors, most of the timbering was still there, and this is a reconstruction of what it looked like originally. And I'm very pleased to say, because Freddie Charles, who was a great friend to us in Gloucester, he was an architect and probably the leading expert of timber frame buildings in his day, and he came up with the idea for a reconstruction that I've done here. But also, you see the brackets underneath the window there and the brackets underneath the jetty. One of those actually survived in the facade. So, I mean, we have lots of bits and pieces to base the reconstruction on. But I must admit, I mentioned Mr. Benson Ansell, but he walked off with one of those brackets. We've never seen it since. So, there we go.
But That's your picture though, isn't it, Phil? You drew
Right,
that.
yeah.
That's it looks absolutely stunning. It's really lovely.
But I mean, it gives an idea of what the building would have originally looked like. We're pretty confident about that reconstruction. Yeah.
Well, it looks wonderful. Here's another lovely old building, 66 Westgate Street.
Yeah, well, 66. This picture I took not too long ago, before the recent restoration took place. Flushed with the success of the restoration of Lady Belgate House, the Civic Trust turned its attention to 66. But in the upshot of it was, this was 1977, it was European Architectural Heritage Year, and we were all geared up with the money we had from the sale of Lady Belgate House, and to embark upon this restoration. But I'm very pleased to say the City Council wanted to chip in with their efforts on this Architectural Heritage Year, and the City Council stepped in and actually did the restoration work on this particular building. I think the next picture may show it better.
Yeah, but I know you've got some. There we are.
Yeah, well, I think at the time, on the left there, I mean, that shows you the state of the building. At the back, you can see it was actually in a very parlous state at the time. And on the right, this was when it was Saunders, the gentlemen's outfitters. They were occupying the building at that particular time. And of course, they eventually vacated it. And but the restoration work was quite interesting in that they actually employ a Dutch company to come in and look at the timber framing. I think the next picture shows it better. This is interesting here. This is on the upper floor, and you see the tie beam, the horizontal tie beam. There's that sort of black lump in the middle. That's basically some form of exotic glue, because there was a chimney inserted up through the roof here. And when they did the restoration, they had to take the chimney down, and this Dutch company came in, and their idea was to fill the gap with this sort of resinous glue to hold the whole lot together. But it's quite fascinating. I mean, the building itself was originally built as two separate buildings, but although it looked pretty grim in places, which it was, I'm very pleased to say it was good enough to, in fact, be restored. And we were then, although we weren't directly involved in the restoration. Oh, could you go back?
Oh, sorry, I've clicked it by mistake. Hang on a sec.
Okay. Yeah, this is down. This is.
Oh,
oh well.
Wait, hang on.
Next one,
Right.
please. That goes to show one of the internal walls. You can see the timber framing. I mean, mostly the original timbers and everything was still there. I mean, it wasn't lacking that. But you can see it's in a pretty parlous state, and it was just about restored in time, I think.
Phil, what do you want to explain? Do you want to explain that metal thing that's cutting across the window?
Oh, well, yeah, well, that's been put in as an extra piece of tensioning. You see, there's a screw type thing along the wire there, and that's just holding it in. I think these were put in during the restoration work just to help brace the building, so that when they removed anything, the building wouldn't actually collapse.
It wasn't to hold the front on there.
Well, no, it was just generally there to keep everything steady while they were taking out various bits and pieces. So,
but you can just see how old, and it's amazing to think that's what it looked like underneath. Yeah. Are these your sketches again?
Yeah, we did a survey through the building, and we rather thought it was worth recording because there are lots of wall decorations in there. Where we've got A and B, that's a stencil, flower sort of stencil, a hand-painted flower decoration. And then the C is actually a repeat of stencil. I can show you a copy of it in a minute. And it was rather fascinating to find these wall decorations because they must have been early 18th, if not 17th century, probably. At least the hand-painted ones were 17th century.
That's me again, sorry.
That's quite all right, stuttering fingers.
There we go.
I think in the next picture, we'll see here we go. You see on the left is this hand-painted decoration, and it actually runs, originally, there were traces of it, all the way through the top floor. And you've got this, is it honeysuckle or something like that? I don't know what it is.
It looks as if it might be honeysuckle, yeah.
And it starts off quite compact. And I get the feeling that when it was being done, the lady of the house said, oh, that's nice. We'll have it right through to the next room. And as the painting progressed through the building, the gaps between the flowers got wider and wider and wider. And obviously the guy that was doing it got pretty fed up. But it was fascinating to see it, to actually find that. And these were actually the plaster up between the roof beams as well. This is, it's rather unusual. I mean, I've never come across this before at all. On the right, you've got this stencil pattern, and those are the colours. I've done that in Photoshop, but it was an 11.5-inch repeat, and somebody had obviously gone around and done the whole room.
And were those what it would have looked like originally? Those colours? Wow.
Yeah, those are the original colours.
Really, really bright. You can't even imagine. I mean, it just, well, it looks amazing, doesn't it? I mean, you obviously found bits of paint on there, and that was so you know the colours. That's right. Yeah, it looks very modern and sort of I don't know what it's like, modern art, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And but I think that's probably 18th century, that, as far as we can work out. Yeah.
Oh, I've done it. It's jumping again. Sorry. Right. So here we are.
Of course, it's been since that time. We're going back. It's been restored, if you like. And what has been rather nice about the second restoration that was done, they've actually, of course, they can't remove the 18th century windows on the first floor. It's all part of the listing. But in this later restoration, they've actually reinstated barge boards, decorated barge boards, which the original building would have had. And then on the right, I've done that sort of reconstruction of how the building probably looked in its original state. And it was originally two separate buildings. And behind those windows are actually horizontal sliding shutters. But it was originally two shops. It's obviously built sort of as a speculative development, and they were let off as two separate shops. But we do know that one of them, they've said that this dates from about 1450. And we do know that from the Gloucester rental, that there was a baker in one of these buildings. And there is to this day, actually down in the cellar, a huge bread oven down there, still down there. I'm not sure of the date of the bread oven, but it's fascinating that that's been carried on.
I think they've been very kind and let us open it, haven't they, before now, for Heritage Open Days. I'm sure I remember, I don't know if every year, but certainly some years we've been allowed to open it and let a few people go down into the basement and have a look.
That's right. I mean, the Headleys were very good. Yes. And they actually opened up to say the cellar at great inconvenience to them, I have to admit, but they were very good in doing that. Yeah.
And the other thing that I know, I've heard people comment about the fact that what a shame they've taken away the black and white timber, but there's a reason for that, isn't there, Phil?
Well, absolutely, because what the bill you're looking at, the building, the reconstruction is as it would have been. I mean, it wouldn't have been black and white. I mean, it's very much a Victorian convention. And people think, oh, that's old, but most of these buildings weren't. They were just timber frame, but plastered over.
Yeah.
I mean, I showed the timbering on the first floor there, but it would have just all been rendered. And may have been in many different colours.
Right. I think this is the next slide. I'll just check that, but I think it's jumping around, unfortunately. I don't know why. Yes, right. It's the next slide. Anyway, we're moving on now to Robert Raikes.
Yeah, this is another one that we produced, or rather the Trust produced. And this was one done by Mary Gardner. Mary was a long-standing member of the Trust. In fact, she was an art teacher, I think, at the Girls' High School for a number of years. And Mary produced several of her own versions. They're rather nice. They're all handwritten, and she did all the drawings. And they just one of the sort of town trails that we produced. And of course, this one is on Robert Raikes, and I think it's rather nice. And it proved quite popular when it was first produced.
I think I think we're probably looking at reproducing more of the same in the future. Where I think we're going through all the old leaflets and having a look at them and seeing what we can do to perhaps in some cases modernize them or bring them up to date. There's the back of the same leaflet. That's so right. A lot of detail and a map and everything.
Yes, it's got the suggested route around the town and the various things to look for. Yeah,
very nice. So now come on to Port 400. Can you explain about that, please, Phil?
Well, yes, Port 400. I mean, 1980 was the 400th anniversary of the granting of the status of port by Queen Elizabeth of Gloucester. And we were very much obviously involved with the Trust trying to get more interest in the docks and try and get them open up, because I remember many years ago you couldn't get in the docks. I mean, they had security police and you were just not, you had to keep out. I mean, I remember at art college we used to go out, have to do sketchings, do architectural drawings, but whenever the docks were quite a good subject, but the college had to go through a long rigmarole to get special permission for us to go down there and draw some of these buildings. And so we got involved with the Inland Waterways Association and coerced the British Waterways Board into coming on board, if you like. And we decided we put on quite an event, and we'd actually provided guides, and actually turned out we were actually manning the gates. But admission was free. But as people came in, we had a large supply of our Port of Gloucester leaflet, and sort of waving them about, and they say, how much is that? You know, 10 pence, so they buy a leaflet, and thinking that was their price of admission. So we don't mind that. We made a lot of money that day. But
is that scaffolding up at on the North Warehouse?
You look at the North Warehouse, and you can see there's scaffolding up there, preventing it from falling down.
Yes, yes.
So anyway, this was an incredibly successful weekend, and people, the Inland Waterways, lots of people came. Obviously, you see around the basin, people visiting boaters came, and it really kick-started, if you like, a major interest in the dock.
I think we've got another slide. Yes, another slide here.
Yeah, you can see that it was quite an event, really. And I mean, obviously, in the years since, the docks have been used for many, many attractions and many events now.
It makes you see the potential, doesn't it? And I can see what looks like a railway line in the foreground on the right.
Oh, that was a special brought-in little steam train for the day. That was not part of the original ones, but they were giving rides for the kids up and down the quayside. It was good.
It looks wonderful and nice and sunny too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we're on to a different place now. This is another place in Westgate Street, obviously. Do you want to talk
St Nicholas House.
through that?
St Nicholas House. That was, you're looking at the east elevation of it, and you can see from that it's not in the best of repair, and it's had some horrible additions put onto it, and one thing and another, and it became vacant. And then we were interested in getting involved in it. In fact, the trust did get involved, but fortunately, we were able to facilitate the restoration. It was taken on by Cannon Inns, who then decided to turn it into a pub and restaurant. But we were able to help them with getting various grants and what have you, so the restoration could take place. But one of the things that came up, on the left here, these magnificent wall paintings, in a room at the back, and they're all below the dado level, because over the years, obviously these beautiful, well, exuberant, I must admit, I mean, I don't know if I could live with that all round, but there's great exuberant paintings, and they survived below the dado rail level, and suddenly we discovered that these all date from sort of late 16th century, and it's a very rare form of survival in a secular building like this. And it was quite a find, which was really super.
And the picture
put in behind these panels now, they're perspex panels which protect it. But then also during the restoration, but down in the cellar, they found this huge Roman column base. Well, all the way down Westgate Street, they found these various column bases at various times, and it was rather interesting to find one sort of in situ right down here in the lower part of Westgate Street. So obviously another Roman monumental building was there somewhere, but actually that now column base is in the yard of the Dick Whittington, up in the one corner under the tree. They've kept it. It's still there.
And if you speak to Alan Meyer, he tells you that he was the one that discovered it. He was doing some earthwork. He was there digging in the basement after the refurbishment, and he says he's the one that found it. So he's very proud of that fact. And Mike and I were in the Dick Whittington a few weeks ago when the pubs first, you could go and have a drink in the garden, and spoke to the new people that have taken it over and said to them, that is a Roman pillar in the corner of your garden there. They had no idea at all. Apparently they'd had a musician there a few nights before on the Saturday night, and he'd been sitting on it and putting his drinks and things on it. They had no idea it was a Roman piece of stonework. So there we are. And also the other thing about this building, coming up with this slide here, but Robin Morris told me that when you first took it over and started clearing it out, it was, excuse me, it had been used as some sort of dog kennel.
Yeah.
And there were lots of leavings and droppings left behind.
Yeah.
And he said you had an arrangement with the local prison, Gloucester Prison, and prisoners came across and were under supervision, obviously, to clear it all up.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the previous occupier, or at least the business that occupied it, they kept this guard dog there, and it just roamed the building and did whatever it wanted to. What was fascinating is about this building, though, this is this wonderful sort of overmantel carving. This, in fact, disappeared in the 1920s. It was said in 1926. The timber paneling and all this carving was sold apparently to somewhere in Chicago in America. So this is in fact in America now. That I think the National Monuments Record do have photographs of it, but I can see on the central panel there it says ER, Elizabeth Regina, and of course the point is that she came here in 1572 or 73, and people saw this, thought, Queen Elizabeth stayed here, like, you know, she sort of stayed in every building in the country, hasn't she? But I mean, it is only a legend, because I mean, she would have had at least about 400 people with her, and she would have obviously stayed with the Dean at the cathedral, but their records apparently don't exist for that particular period. But there's no way you could accommodate Queen Elizabeth in this building and then all the hangers on that she brought with her. So that's a bit of a legend, but it's a good one. Again, there, the picture, it shows you during the start of restoration, exactly like the state of the building it was in. And I think, you know, I think it was great that we managed to save this. And say Canon Inns were really very much involved in partnership with us on that one.
That's the side, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the side running down. And I mean, when you look at what has been done, of course, new bits were added on the back to make it a bit more commercially viable. But at least the integrity of the building has been kept, and it's still a very atmospheric building. It's wonderful. We've still got it. And that's the sort of the facade as it was, and it was in a very parlous state. And there were lumps of stone falling off it and everything at the time.
I think that's 18th century again at the front, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of a Queen Anne. It was like all the timber buildings in Westgate Street, they've all had new fronts put onto them. And so that would date from, say, late 17th, early 18th century. Yeah.
The new owner, apparently the new owners are calling it, or the manager there's calling it the West Wing. There you go.
Oh, well.
And that's what it looks like.
Yeah, now. That's afterwards, and I think they did a marvelous job. It's still with us and still working. Yeah,
brilliant. Right, next one. Another leaflet.
Yeah,
so do you want to talk us through this?
Yeah, it was the Via Sacra. This was the idea that Mr. Jellicoe came up with when in the 60s. The idea of putting forward about the redevelopment of Gloucester, and he suggested the Via Sacra. Well, of course, it is purely a modern concept, and it's Mr. Jellicoe's concept. Unfortunately, when people come to Gloucester, they think it's some ancient way around the city. But there we go. But anyway, we decided it was worth, and quite a number of historic buildings on that particular route. And again, Mary Gardner set to, and she produced this walk around leaflet. And again, all hand drawn and hand lettered and what have you, and I think it was a rather nice little leaflet. Yeah. Well, I mentioned about the Port 400 and the derelict North Warehouse. This is the bit actually facing towards the prison, and we had a number of people in the trust who were incredibly interested in the docks. Brian Tate was really the lead on this. Brian had an office which was actually tucked on the end of the North Warehouse, so he had a particular interest in this building, and it came to a public inquiry. And the point was this, that at the time the British Waterways weren't interested. They actually proposed to fill in the Victoria dock and build on it. That was what they wanted to do. And so it went through this long drawn out public inquiry, and things got quite heated, but fortunately again, I mean, we were in partnership with other people, the Civic Trust, Inland Waterways Group, all sorts of people, archaeological societies, B&G, what have you, all got involved in this. And I'm very pleased to say again, the result of this was that they were then refused permission to knock it down. And then, of course, the beauty of it is the council, and I think it was Alderman Keith Fisher who came up with the idea about turning all these warehouses into the council offices. And then the idea was to close various offices all dotted around the city and put them under one roof in here and also in the other 3 warehouses. And thank goodness it happened. I mean, it was that catalyst that really actually preserved these buildings and then actually led the docks restoration we see today. This is apart from our annual report in 1981, this is the aviation murals. We took part, we can't take the credit for this. In fact, we can actually put the credit to this is John Lovell, because it was suggested there need to be some form of marking the aviation industry in and around Gloucester. And John had got very much involved with this, and he was the prime mover. Say the trust dipped in. There's Canon Payton on the left of the trust, and then the next but one to him is Basil Cumley. Roger Langston, the mayor, various RAF people, and the gentleman with a brolly next is Mr. John Cuss, who was the chief stressman at the Gloucester Aircraft Company at one time. And it was then we embarked upon these sculptures designed by Darcy Rawlings to commemorate the aviation industry in Gloucester. And this is called the Jubilee Garden, but of course it's not there anymore. But
no, I was just going to say, but they've moved, haven't they? They've been taken out to the Jet Age Museum, I think, so they're safe.
Yeah, they unfortunately some of them have been damaged. These have been repaired, and they are at the Jet Age Museum now. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
St Oswald's Priory, just to say this, we got involved with St Oswald's Priory purely from a worry about the monument. And at the time this cropped up, we had our own Historic Features Committee who was interested in archaeology and what have you. And at the time, there'd been an excavation on the site which proved quite a valuable source of the layout of the priory. But the city council came up with a scheme that they decided they wanted a coach park, and they said they wanted to turn the land around the priory into a coach park, which I thought would have been wonderful. But again, there were quite a number of objections, so we got involved in that, in obviously objecting to it. And fortunately, that didn't happen. So I'm very pleased to say. So we're always keeping an eye on these various monuments, and we chip in every now and again. And I think this scaffolding was put up at the time when bits started to fall off the top. But I'm very pleased to say that not long after this, there was a fair period of restoration took place.
So what's this?
Well, these 3 people are they're tracing footpaths. On the left is John Punch, and in the middle is Dick Turner. On the right is Evelyn Christmas, and they're part of the Riverside Walk committee we had. In fact, it was right from 72, when you look at the annual report, it was suggested concern, mainly by Dick Turner, that the Riverside Walk footpaths had sort of started to disappear. And a lot of people used to go many years ago from the lower part of Westgate Street. They walk upriver to the Globe or the Jolly Waterman pub of a summer's evening, and it was a nice walk up and back. And suddenly you find that it's the path has started to disintegrate or fall into the river, which is what does happen. And so consequently, we set up the group where Dick was leading this group, and gradually they got sections. The idea was to try and open the footpath all the way from Hempstead right up through to the Globe or the Jolly Waterman pub. This is a section near Riverside Farm, just up from Westgate Bridge. And you can see here in the distance, there's a rebuilt bridge, and there's a reinstatement of this wall and the footpath itself. And so all these efforts, I mean, it was absolutely wonderful, the amount of time and effort that Dick and the rest of them put in. And here's the 1983, that this section along Riverside was the first section to be publicly reopened in 1983. And there's the Mayor, Peter Arnold, and with him is Basil Cumley, who was then chairman of the trust at that time. Yeah, well, this is the Oxleys. So again, this is where we swung into action, there was a proposal, because around this time, there used to be this, the Greyhound racing track at Long Levens, which then disappeared, obviously under housing. And I don't know who was responsible, but somebody came up and suggested the Oxleys could be turned into a Greyhound Stadium, and also as a new site for a large football stadium. Well, we all know that the wet weather in the winter, you always know about the floods. And we then waded in and made our objections known. And I just did this drawing, stick it on the front of the annual report to try and sort of try and lighten the subject a little bit. Woods Army Navy stores, again, this was something we got involved with, although we're more advisory than anything. But Woods Army Navy stores, it was actually established in 1937, and it became quite a landmark in Gloucester. And eventually Woods closed down, it became empty. And then Sam Smith's Brewery showed an interest in the building. And I'm very pleased to say we were able to help them along the way in the restoration of the building itself. And in fact, we suggested, because it was right next to, or even one time part of the old Crown Inn, we suggested they should call their pub the Old Crown, which they, in fact they did do. Yeah. This is a little bit towards just around the back to the bit further down Westgate Street, where these people may remember, some of them, the old entrance to the old Quap Creamery depot that used to be there. This is a city archaeological unit moved in, and they carried out a dig. What was absolutely fascinating, because we know that the old Crown was the headquarters of Colonel Massey during the siege of Gloucester. And actually, I don't have any direct pictures of it, but in this excavation, they actually found a 17th century loo, which they christened immediately as Colonel Massey's loo, because they actually found in it, in the bottom, there's some broken wine glasses, which actually dated exactly to the siege of Gloucester. So they were quite happy they found Colonel Massey's loo in the old Crown. That's the work that started going on around the old Army and Navy stores. There's another long story about this, and I think actually Robin mentioned it in his last report, but you can see what a marvellous job has been done in the restoration by Sam Smith's Brewery. Wonderful job. Very pleased. Save the building, which is what
I always think it's quite amusing that the pub was always called the Crown, or the Old Crown, years ago, and it was where Colonel Massey held, as you say, his headquarters. But of course, we were on the parliamentary side, and the fact that it's called the Crown, I think, is quite well, it's quite amusing.
Well, it was called the Old Crown before that date. So I mean, I think old habits die hard in Gloucester, don't they?
Yeah. But the fact that he chose that as his headquarters, okay. Well,
I think it was just comfortable. Well, why not? To choose a pub, wonderful thing. Absolutely.
They probably brewed a good ale there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, back to the docks.
Oh yeah, North Warehouse. This well, on the wall, the Atlas Bell. This was actually a joint effort, really. It was initially Rotary Club of Gloucester and the Civic Trust. We then got involved and helped to get the Atlas Bell replaced back on the warehouse, because that bell was originally used for the starting and finishing times in the docks, but it was then moved down to Shepherding as a sort of an aid in foggy weather. You ring the bell during fog. But anyway, it was then, because of radar on boats, they didn't need it, so we got involved and helped bring it back to be put back where it came from originally. St Nicholas Clock, again, one of the things we got involved with, I think we paid a little bit towards it. There was a wonderful mechanical device actually in the tower, and then the whole thing was along rods and gears, then actually helped sort of turn the clock itself, because there was a mechanism in the tower. And it was decided that was all worn out. And so consequently, an electric mechanism was fitted, and as Robin said, it was given a pacemaker, which I think is a rather nice way of putting it. So that was a little project we got involved.
And it's quite nice, because of course now we've taken over the Folk, which is right opposite St Nicholas Church. We're actually intending to form a partnership with them, because they've got a nice big space inside, which only at the moment you can only use in the summertime because it's too cold in the winter. But we're going to offer them the use of our toilets and our cafe.
Wonderful.
So it's going to be quite a good arrangement.
Yeah.
Right, back then Westgate Street again, but on
Hyatt House. This is obviously this was once part of that Crown Inn. the Crown Inn tended to expand and contract as the economic situation arose. And this was actually part of the Crown Inn itself at one time. Again, it was an absolutely dreadful condition. And although we got involved in showing interest in it and negotiating some loans for it, or actually some grants for it, it was the Avon Down Housing Association took it on. And I think it was rather nice that they were able, with our help, were able then to convert the whole lot back into living accommodation, which I think was a proper and fit use for the building itself. So, and of course, these buildings were been occupied over the years by various businesses, and they were never interested in restoration or looking after the buildings. But as you can see now, it's a wonderful, wonderful restoration took place.
And you can see the old building behind, can't you? That's the other thing.
Sorry?
You can see the old building behind the facade again.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there is, again, there's lots of timber framing in there, and there's part of one of the original staircases and what have you. And so, again, you've actually sort of got this 18th century front, which is what's happened to a lot of timber buildings in Gloucester. But there is a lot of the old buildings still behind there.
I wonder how many of the people that live there know that.
Probably not.
Right, now this is a collection here.
Yeah, we got involved with the wells, the various wells around Gloucester. At the bottom there was St Anne's Well at Hempstead. There's obviously, I think, I can't remember, that's Well Cross, Red Well on the right, and of course down and behind the railings is Red Well. These are on Robertswood Hill and one at Hempstead. And it was decided they were in a parlous state, so we commissioned a report by Dr. Peters, who was then working with the Astam Design Partnership. And Dr. Peters provided a report as to the state and condition, and a certain amount of work was done. Now that Well Cross, at least up on Robertswood Hill, is surrounded by iron railings and one thing and another, and it can be they're being protected. Red Well was interesting because they always said that the water from the Red Well was always very good for a treatment of eyes, apparently, if you bathed your eyes in the water from the Red Well. But anyway, there we go.
Right,
So
Heritage Open Day.
Yeah, well, this was, we started in 1995. Actually, Heritage Open Day started the year before, but we didn't actually get round to it. But it was following a discussion with Amanda Wadsley, who was then head of museums at the City Council. We discussed trying to open up things, and she was very keen. And also they opened up things like the Folk Museum, we had that Transport Museum. Things opened up owned by the council were opened up. We actually got in touch with English Heritage, and we actually opened Blackfriars for the first time. And we had nearly 600 people come round Blackfriars, which was wonderful. And so to prove the press were good, we did a live broadcast from the top of St Michael's Tower at 8:15 on one Saturday. And it was amazing because I was there with Pete Wilson. We climbed up to the top of St Michael's Tower. We got there with about 2 minutes to spare, and we had to start broadcasting live, and both of us were completely out of breath. It was wonderful. But anyway, yeah, this proved absolutely wonderful.
And I've had people talk to me and say, I remember climbing up the tower, because you must have years ago let people go up there, but you know, we can't do that anymore now. But
you could. You had to limbo under a bar at one point. But
now,
anyway.
tell us what happened here, because this was very exciting.
This was a rather interesting event. We decided that we would take people up to the top of the tower, and the idea was that we had several guides involved. And the idea was you should just do one stint. You go up the tower, and then you come down again. But one of our guides was so keen, decided that before his thing, he would go up and have a look. So he went all the way up to the top. I mean, he was getting on in years, all the way up to the top, came all the way back down again. He then decided to take a tour, took another look up, came back down again, and I think took another ad hoc party. Unfortunately, when he got up to the top of the third account, he collapsed. There was somebody in the party, a nurse was in the party, and thought he'd had a heart attack. And so consequently, this furore happened, and the fire brigade were given this wonderful exercise of getting him off the top of St Michael's Tower using this incredibly tall lift. I'm very pleased to say that after he was taken down, he was taken to hospital, but he was perfectly fine. It was just one of those things, unfortunately. But it caused a lot of a lot of interest, I can assure you. So we haven't done it since.
No, exactly.
Emperor Nerva. This is we decided to mark the millennium because of a statue was discovered, or fragments of the statue was discovered in the dig on what the old Bell Hotel, and it was then decided that this is obviously to Emperor Nerva, who created Gloucester as a colonial, and Civic Trust decided we'll mark the millennium. And the prime mover behind this, I have to say, is Nigel Spry. Nigel, in fact, was the driver behind this. We managed to get lots and lots of donations, grants. We had the late Peter Price left us a certain amount of money for sort of statuary, so we had that. And so consequently, they decided that we would then put this statue created by Anthony Stones, one of the world's famous sculptors, and it was actually officially unveiled in October 2002. And also, what is fascinating, underneath the statue there is a time capsule which has 130 items related to Gloucester at that time. There's things like Marks and Spencer's, because it was near Marks and Spencer's. They gave 2 complete sets of ladies and gents underwear that went in. Phil Vickery, Gloucester Rugby Club, gave us one of his rugby shirts, which was great. There was Harry Potter DVDs because the thing had been made in Gloucester. And I always have to say there is a list of 130 items, but I can honestly say now, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. There are several other items that went in there, which nobody knows about. And it's not on the list. So anybody who looks it up in the future is going to get quite a surprise.
Right, and another statue. This is a different one, though. I don't think we actually built this one, but
no. It's just, this rather symptomizes really what way we are. We get involved in all sorts of things. I mean, David Champion with a survey group look at sorts of things, and there were these proposals to do work around landscaping work around the Robert Rake statue. And it's all sorts of things which we do get involved. Sometimes, we just get on and do it, make our comments known, and hopefully get the sort of right result. But yeah, I mean, it was just a matter of showing interest. And so I think the statue at that time, I think it needed a bit of TLC, which I think it did get in the.
And this is a replica, isn't it? The one that's in London on the embankment.
Yeah, there's one on the embankment, but I think they're sort of cast for the same thing, I think, apparently, I'm not sure. But in the 1930s. And this, well, this sort of brings us up to date, doesn't it, Sue?
It does.
This was the 2005 annual report that I mentioned earlier about St Oswald's Priory. And what's happened recently is in 2005, they decided there was worry about the work on the top of the tower. The stonework was crumbling. And they came up with this wonderful idea, what they call soft capping. And the idea is you put layers of turf on the top, which keeps the frost out, and it still allows a certain amount of moisture to be in the stonework, and actually without causing too many problems. And at that time, we'd had lots of floods around there. So I suddenly I thought this cartoon would be rather nice. So with all this grass growing on the top of St Oswald, I thought, well, we'll move the sheep in there to keep the grass down.
And as you say, it's very, very appropriate at the moment because, of course, the council have just done exactly the same exercise again, and you can see all the turf stuck on the top of Oxleys. And Gareth, you've recently done a video about it, haven't you? You had made a video of them actually doing it, and I think that's right.
Yeah, that's right. There's a video on our YouTube channel that me and Mark made. An interview with Kate Biggs, who's one of the city conservation officers, and the company who are actually doing the work. And we went up on the scaffolding, had a look at what they're doing. It was great fun. Well,
now we've decided that this is going to be our last slide, and look at that, Phil. I can't believe how amazing that is. It is actually 8:15. We've done it. I was so worried because we've got about 45 slides to get through. So if you want to put us back onto do I take off? I can't remember. Do I take off? I stop my share. That's it. And here we are back again. And of course, now is the opportunity. If anybody has got any questions to ask Phil, about any of the slides that they've seen, or any other questions about the Civic Trust and what happened to it and what we were doing all these other years. That took us up there, I think, to 2005. You see, look how much that has happened. I've just been absolutely amazed, Phil, looking at these various slides with you, that the Civic Trust started in 1972. And the first 15, 20 years, absolutely incredible, the amount of things that the Civic Trust members got involved with then. You must have been exhausted.
Yeah, well, I think probably because the world changed slightly. I mean, I think attitudes changed, particularly from, well, within the council and other people. And there was one councillor used to call us those damn preservationists, which we thought, we were very pleased to hear that. But I mean, I think we made the point about heritage being an economic necessity. And well, we tried to do what we did, and it was just things cropped up, and then eventually things eased off a little bit. There was always going to be things we've got to get involved in. But, you know, those are all the pressing things that needed doing at the time. And of course, in the trust, we had the likes of sort of Basil Cumley, Brian Tate, Peter Price, and we had architects and people who knew what they were doing. And of course, Robin, with Robin and his legal advice was absolutely indispensable. And those sorts of things, we had a whole sort of array of people with various skills that were able to sort of meet the challenge. So, yeah.
Well, it looks as if we're beginning to get a couple of questions in. I can see that there is a question by Mark. No, I'll tell you what, the first one is Juliet Bailey. So Juliet, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? Wherever you are. Where's Juliet?
It was simply a question about the one of the early places you were doing. You said there was a bread oven in the cellar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said it was in a 15th century building, and I was worried about whether there were internal bread ovens at that time, and wasn't it a fire hazard in towns, and was it common in towns?
Yeah, I mean, with the bread ovens, yes, they were invariably inside buildings, but of course, somewhere in separate buildings outside or in the garden, what have you, but somewhere inside. And the point being is that you had the curfew. So all the fires had to go out at 8 o'clock at night, and you couldn't light them again until about 5:30 in the morning. So, I mean, you had to put your fires out, so nothing was left burning during the night. So, but yeah, they were aware of that. But yeah, there were quite a number of bakers actually in Gloucester in the medieval period.
And you mentioned the curfew. Of course, we've got the curfew bell in St Michael's Tower. So anybody that fancies going in there and ringing the curfew bell, you're allowed to do it any time of the day now. But it was that bell, wasn't it, on St Michael's Tower, that rang the curfew early in the morning, and then again 8 o'clock in the evening. All about, you know, and what's that word mean? It's cover the fire or something, isn't it, Bill? Yes.
Yeah, cover the fire. Yeah.
Okay. We've got a question here from Mark. Juliet, if you'd like to mute yourself again now, and then Mark, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. What do you think is your proudest moment up to 2005?
Oh, blimey!
Nice challenge for you.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many landmark things. I think the greatest satisfaction, I know it was so early on, but the restoration of Lady Belgate House, that was that really set the seal on everything. I mean, the trust demonstrated it could do things, and it wasn't a complaining organisation. It just got on and did it. I know we had help from various council departments and what have you, but I think the trust proved its worth with Lady Belgate House. I mean, there are so many other things which were interesting. Obviously, we got the guides, we've got all sorts of various parts of the trust, but I think Lady Belgate House, I think, is the one. I mean, that if I have to pick one, I'll pick that one.
And I think the fact that it's not open for Heritage Open Days is, and I think I mentioned this last time, it is such a pity. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Do you want to mute yourself again? Paul Tolman has got a question. Paul, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, sir. Hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Okay. Yeah. And my question, I'd like to thank you, Phil, for sending me those details about Queen Anne. Because if anyone happens to know, in the park there is a statue of Queen Anne, which is a total embarrassment to the city. You wouldn't know whether it was male, female, or actually a human being. But to get a new statue rebuilt would cost about £65,000. Now, Phil very kindly told me what Queen Anne's relationship was with Gloucester, in that she gave some money to some organisation, Phil, which escapes me.
Was the Queen Anne's Bounty?
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But the main interesting thing about Queen Anne, and by the way, the path down by the Sud Brook, which is by Western Road, is called Queen Anne's Way. But the main interesting thing about Queen Anne was she had terrible times of giving birth to children, and most of them died. But the last one, I think it was number 11, actually survived. But he died at the age of 11 as the Duke of Gloucester.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering whether anyone might be interested in taking that up with me, because I'm trying to see if I can get it replaced.
Well, I just wonder if, in fact, it's sad to say whether she's too far gone. I don't know. I mean, we need to have somebody who knows about sculpture and stone. I think that's what you need to do. I think would be to get somebody who knows what they're talking about. And there are ways of repairing these things. But I mean, I don't think within the trust we've got that expertise. We did have, but not now. So I think that we need some sort of official report done, I think.
Yeah, I got someone through Kate Biggs, as you know, who's a conservation officer, knows somebody who gave me a price for it with a picture I sent her, which I got from Lenin Palace. There's a proper picture. You know, you can see what she actually looks like, and that's where I got the £65,000 from. It's a lot of money, but at the end of the day, I think that statue in the park of Queen Anne is an embarrassment to the city.
Well, yes, as it is, yes.
Yeah.
Only got to find 65,000 and be all right.
That's the trouble. These things cost a lot of money.
Yeah, sorry, Sue, just a minute. I wasn't thinking that the Civic Trust would find it all, because we could get. But if you've got any ideas, I'm trying to look into it a bit later on when I've got a bit of time. But there may be like Historic England and places like that. We might be able to get some.
It is a shame when we have these public works of art that they get so dilapidated. I think the one of Charles II, it's a shame that he's tucked away, and I think we did help with his statue. I think we replaced a leg, didn't we, Phil?
Well, there was a shell coating was done. Charles II, because he was starting to sort of not fray around the edges, but he was beginning to show the weather was getting to him. There was some sort of a coating was put on it to keep the wet out and keep the frost out. I mean, there was an idea at the time. You remember when those remember that bridge in Southgate Street that used to cross Southgate Street? Well, Queen Anne and Charles were both in that part of Westgate Street originally, and there was a suggestion that either end of where they took the bridge down, the blank wall that was left, you could create niches, and then we moved those two statues into those niches, and then that would have protected them from the weather, and it would have been, they would have been restored at the time. But of course, that didn't happen. So.
Right, we've now got a question from Mark Harrison. Mark, would you like to put your question to Phil and unmute yourself so you can ask him yourself?
He said there, Sue, he can't because he hasn't got a microphone on his
PC.
Okay.
So. Oh, right. Okay, so I'll ask the question then. Fantastic to see all the historic buildings being saved. Have any listed buildings been demolished since the Civic Trust was established? And is it a coincidence that so many of today's listing buildings, for example, the docks warehouses, were listed in the year after the CT was established? And he's asking somebody else to say the question, obviously. So anyway, there you are, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that since we formed, we have there have been a couple of buildings we've lost. One, which are great my great disappointment was the old infirmary building in Southgate Street. That was an incredible Georgian building, would have actually, the front part, not all the stuff at the back, made a wonderful hotel and could have been turned into something really useful. That went, unfortunately, there are reasons which I will mention off air, but and there was another one in Southgate Street, which went down about 5-6 years ago, but it was in such a bad condition, there was just absolutely no way it could be saved. I mean, we don't demand that. I mean, we just hope that buildings won't get into that state in the first place. So yes, there are a couple since the trust formed, but fortunately more, there have been moves to about 1 or 2 other buildings which have not happened. So that's been good, you know.
I don't have any more questions from people. So perhaps now I ought to just to say a word of thanks to Phil. But before I do that, I'd just like to mention this actually will be our last talk this summer. I think this is the 7th or 8th one that we've had. As always, very popular. There won't be a talk in June or July or August. I think people will be busy out in their gardens, and it's probably not even worth trying to put one on. John Lovell is hoping to put the Gala Club talks back on in September, with fingers crossed that that's allowed and he can get in there. And those will be reinstated in September, October and November, as usual. And then he doesn't usually organise a talk for December or January because of the bad weather. So that's where we're going to come back in again with a couple of Zoom meetings. I haven't decided yet who's going to do what, but I have had a conversation with David Champion, and he's agreed to do one all about the tower and how it came about and the history behind it, and how the Civic Trust managed to get a grant for the St Michael's Tower. And so we shall find out more about that with David Champion, either December or January. Right, if everybody would, I just want to see if there's anything else. Oh yes, just a reminder, if anybody else wants to turn up on Thursday, the 3rd of June, outside the Folk, and help Paul and myself distribute some invitations to the local population, that would be very welcome. And the other thing I will say now, if people would like to unmute themselves, and then we can actually say thank you very much to Phil in the normal way. Thank you very much, Phil, really good. Thank you.